Can a guest influence a cultural norm? Narrative, a guest and the power of norms, the two currents of giving. In the land of Aurelia, culture was a tapestry of shared traditions, hospitality, respect, and communal festivals. Yet one thread was missing, the expectation of giving to food banks. For most Aurelians, charity was private, occasional, and never a social obligation. Then came Elena, a guest from a distant culture where giving was a moral cornerstone. She didn't arrive with banners or speeches, only questions. What if those with enough shared with those who have none? Wouldn't that strengthen your community? At first her voice was soft, almost muted. She was, after all, a guest. But her words found resonance among a minority, those 30% who already gave quietly. They began to speak more openly, framing giving not as charity but as solidarity. Soon, two currents formed. The advocates, who embraced Elena's vision and saw giving as a moral duty. The traditionalists, who resisted, fearing that enforced generosity would erode freedom and authenticity. The divide was real, yet it didn't fracture Aurelia. Why? Because both sides shared a deeper unity, the belief that community matters. They debated, disagreed, but did so with respect. No one was shamed, no one was silenced. Over time, the practice grew organically. Advocates modeled generosity without coercion. Festivals began featuring food drives. Schools taught the value of sharing. Slowly, the idea shifted from optional kindness to expected virtue. What made this evolution nearly unresisted? Gradual integration. Giving was framed as an extension of existing values, not a foreign imposition. Visible benefits. Hunger declined, social trust rose. Even skeptics saw the practical good. Respect for choice. Early adopters never demanded compliance, they invited participation. Years later, Aurelia stood transformed. The old divide had faded, not through domination but through dialogue and lived example. What began as a guest's question became a cultural norm woven so deeply that not giving felt strange, yet dissent remained possible. Unity endured, enriched by diversity. The answer seems to rest on two forces: the benefits of the new norm, reducing hunger and fostering solidarity. 2. The respect for dissent, allowing space for different opinions without stigma. If the culture can balance these, the shift becomes a story of moral growth rather than cultural domination. If not, it risks becoming a tale of power dynamics where compliance replaces conviction. Let's review a counterexample. In Aurelia, the idea of giving to food banks began as a gentle suggestion from a guest, Elena. At first, it seemed harmless, an invitation to solidarity. Advocates embraced it, and the practice spread organically. But not everyone saw generosity as virtue. For some, the new norm felt like theft disguised as morality. They believed resources were earned, not owed, and that giving to the undeserving undermined fairness. These voices grew louder as the expectation of giving shifted from voluntary to socially obligatory. What began as polite disagreement hardened into moral resistance. Traditionalists framed the movement as coercion, a creeping force eroding autonomy. They organized, arguing, if charity becomes law, freedom dies. Soon, Aurelia fractured, not violently but structurally. Two governance systems emerged. The Solidarity Commonwealth, where giving was codified and enforced as a civic duty. The Autonomy Alliance, where charity remained private and voluntary, and any mandate was forbidden. The split was ideological, but it reshaped geography, law, and identity. Migration patterns reflected moral alignment. Those who valued collective welfare moved to the Commonwealth. Those who prized individual liberty joined the alliance. Despite the division, a fragile unity persisted under a federal charter for trade and defense. Yet cultural narratives diverged. In the Commonwealth, giving was celebrated as justice. In the alliance, enforced giving was condemned as tyranny. Over decades, the divide deepened. Each side built institutions reinforcing its worldview, schools, media, even art. What began as a question of food banks became a symbolic battle over freedom and fairness. The irony? Both sides claimed moral high ground. Both believed they were protecting the soul of Aurelia. And so a guest's question meant to unite through compassion became the seed of a cultural schism, proving that norms can grow organically, but resistance can grow just as naturally when values collide. The core question: can a guest influence a cultural norm such as charitable giving when visiting a culture where this is not widely practiced? And what ethical considerations arise when doing so? 2. Key factors at play. Cultural relativism versus moral universalism. Relativism. Respect local norms. Avoid imposing external values. Universalism. Some values, for example, helping those in need, may be seen as morally good across cultures. Role of the guest. Guests often have muted voices because they lack social standing and legitimacy in the host culture. Ethical expectation. Respect the host culture. But this doesn't mean silence. Dialogue is possible. Existing cultural variation. If 30% of the population already gives, the norm is not monolithic. There's room for moral discourse. 3. Mechanism of cultural change. Persuasion versus coercion. Persuasion through dialogue and modeling behavior is ethically acceptable. Coercion or shaming is problematic because it undermines autonomy. Norm internalization. If enough people agree and adopt the practice, it can shift from an optional act to a perceived obligation. Over time, this can create a new cultural expectation, similar to how norms evolve in families or societies. 4 potential outcomes. Positive shift. Increased charitable giving benefits vulnerable populations. Cultural divide. If non-agreeing members feel pressured or disrespected, it can create tension. Power dynamics. If the guest has social influence or resources, their advocacy might feel like dominance rather than dialogue. 5. Ethical evaluation. Respect for autonomy. People should freely choose to adopt the norm. Respect for diversity. Avoid framing non-givers as morally inferior. Benefit analysis. If the practice reduces harm and promotes well-being, it has strong moral weight. Analogy to parent-child. Dynamic children often comply with parents for benefits or power dynamics. Similarly, cultural adoption can occur due to perceived advantages, social approval, moral identity, but ideally, it should be based on reasoned agreement, not mere compliance. Framework, norm entrepreneurship, and cultural moral dynamics. Core components, agents and roles. Guest, a temporary participant in the host culture with limited legitimacy but potential moral influence. Host culture members, individuals embedded in the prevailing norm structure. Existing norm entrepreneurs, those already advocating for change, for example, the 30% who give. 2 norm structure. Dominant norm, giving to food banks is optional or uncommon. Emergent norm, giving is morally appropriate and socially expected. 2. Ethical principles. Respect for autonomy. Influence must be non-coercive. Cultural pluralism. Norm change should allow dissent without stigma. Beneficence. Evaluate whether the proposed norm reduces harm and promotes well-being. 3. Mechanisms of change. 1. Norm entrepreneurship. Individuals, including guests, act as moral entrepreneurs by introducing new practices or framing existing ones as morally salient. Tools. Persuasion, modeling behavior, moral discourse. 2. Threshold dynamics. If adoption reaches a critical mass, for example, 30% to 50% to majority, the norm shifts from optional to obligatory. Social proof. People conform when they perceive a practice as widely accepted. 3. Internalization versus compliance. Internalization. People adopt the norm because they believe it is right. Compliance. People adopt due to social pressure or perceived benefits, similar to child-parent dynamic. Stages of cultural norm change. 1. Introduction. Guest raises the question, frames giving as morally desirable. 2. Deliberation. Dialogue among host members. Some agree, others resist. 3. Critical mass. Enough members adopt the practice to create social expectation. 4. Institutionalization. Norm becomes embedded in cultural identity. 5. Stabilization or polarization. Either full integration or cultural split based on dissent tolerance. V. Evaluation criteria. Legitimacy of influence. Was the guest's advocacy respectful and dialogical? Impact on autonomy. Did individuals freely choose to adopt the norm? Cultural cohesion. Did the change foster unity or deepen divides? Moral outcome. Does the new norm enhance well-being and justice? Let's review this again. In Aurelia's new era of generosity, food banks had become a symbol of solidarity. The movement was spreading, and many saw it as a moral triumph. But not everyone agreed. Darius, a sharp-minded entrepreneur with a taste for risk, thought the entire idea was ludicrous. To him, giving away food to what he saw as the lost, lazy, and undeserving was wasteful, especially when he could make better use of it, turning it into profit. He had plans to sell the extra goods on the side, reinvest in his growing business, and maybe even hit the jackpot at the gambling tables. After all, he supported the working people by giving them jobs by doing the right thing. Darius believed he could flip the narrative. If caught, he would argue, why give to the undeserving? Isn't it better to create wealth for me for all? My way aligns with what most people secretly think, that resources should reward effort, not entitlement. He saw himself as a realist in a world drifting toward idealism. While others framed giving as justice, Darius framed it as misallocation. He even convinced a few skeptics that his approach was practical. Food banks breed dependency. Markets create opportunity. I'm not stealing, I'm reallocating for growth. But beneath the rhetoric lay a gambling habit, a hunger for quick wins. His vision of better use was tangled with personal vice. Still, Darius believed he could rationalize it all because his arguments tapped into a latent intuition many shared, fear of being exploited by the undeserving, by the government dependent. As Aurelia's cultural shift gained momentum, Darius became a symbol of resistance not through open rebellion, but through quiet subversion and persuasive storytelling at local bars. He even put a few on the payroll to help out selling. His actions exposed a truth. Even norms that grow organically face friction when they collide with self-interest and competing moral intuitions. In the end, Aurelia's unity was tested not by ideology alone, but by the human tendency to justify what benefits the individual interest. Moral norm versus self-interest. The food bank program was created to reduce inequality and promote solidarity, yet Darius uses it as an opportunity for personal gain, gambling, and profit. The very system designed to curb selfishness becomes a tool for selfishness. That's ironic because a norm meant to foster altruism ends up enabling exploitation. The cultural push for generosity unintentionally creates new avenues for greed. 2. Rationalization of wrongdoing. Darius frames his theft as practical and aligned with common intuition. Why give to the undeserving? Better to create wealth. This is ironic because he claims moral alignment while acting immorally. His argument appeals to efficiency and fairness, but his real motive is gambling, a deeply inefficient and risky use of resources. 3. The guest's idealism versus reality. The guest's original vision was organic cultural growth toward compassion. Instead, it sparks resistance and rationalization, where people twist moral language to justify vice. Ironically, the cultural shift toward generosity strengthens the narrative of entitlement and fear of exploitation, which Darius exploits. 4. Collective good versus individual vice. The irony lies in the contrast. The program's collective goal, feed the hungry. Darius's individual goal, feed his gambling habit. He even believes he can convince others that his theft is what most people secretly think, turning vice into virtue through rhetoric. 5. Organic growth versus organic corruption. The story began with the idea that norms can grow organically into near universal acceptance. The irony is that corruption and resistance can also grow organically through self-interest, fear, and persuasive narratives. Both forces evolve naturally, but in opposite moral directions.